thank you for coming along this afternoon to our Sustainable Work Practices Professional Development. I think everybody's aware that we try and implement sustainable work practices in our workplace. So this afternoon, the purposes of our presentation are to try and combine and compile our knowledge of sustainable work practices and generate the momentum to implement these practices in our workplace, to actually get people to want to do these things. And the way that you get people to want to do things is to explain to them why, or discuss with them why. Why should we be following sustainable work practices? Why do you think?
For the environment.
For the environment. And that's what we all think all the time, that we should do this because of the environmental impact of our work practices. So I'm not going to dwell on it, I'm going to move on because we all know about that aspect of it. What I would like you to think about is what percentage of Australians are concerned about sustainability? What percentage of Australians do you think are concerned about sustainability?
My guess would be about 50%.
50%? Are we all happy with 50%? Okay, this is the actual statistics. 90% of Australians are actually concerned about sustainability, which is probably more than you would think. But the next figure was the one that really surprised me. What percentage of Australians feel they are doing enough? And if you look at it, 50% of Australians feel that they are doing enough. 90% care, 50% feel they are doing enough. And I was actually surprised by that because I thought it would be a lot lower. I thought a lot less Australians would think that they are actually doing enough, which leads me on to our second why. Why should we do this? Because the trend these days is for people to care but not want to do it themselves. So they like to go to businesses who use environmentally friendly work practices so they feel they are doing their bit by choosing businesses who are doing their bit for them. That's the way they work it. So when it comes down to attracting and retaining customers, which keeps us employed, okay, this business, if it can continue, we keep a job. You do that by attracting and retaining customers. So when it comes down to it, Dominic Powell from Business Advice says it makes pure economic sense. You should employ environmentally friendly work practices, sustainable work practices, for pure economic reasons. Because when it comes down to it, economic sustainability in this environment these days relies on being environmentally sustainable. You think about it in some ways, the less we use, the less we have to pay for. So really what they state these days is businesses that are proactive in building sustainable practices are most likely to find themselves succeeding. So that has got to be a really good reason why. Then we come down to how. Are we all familiar with the symbol?
Reuse, recycle.
Yep, reduce, recycle, one more.
Reuse.
Reuse, perfect. So reduce, reuse, recycle. So reduce how much you use, reuse it until you're finished with it, and then you make sure that you recycle it. But I would actually think to add in one more at the start. Avoid using it in the first place. If you don't use it, then you don't have to worry about doing all these things. So that should be step one, to actually avoid using these things. So I'm a very visual person and I wanted a visual that really captured this. So if you think of this as being your waste paper bin, this is what happens with avoid, reduce, reuse, recycle. So the idea is if you actually had to reduce the size of bin you had, you would find that you're doing all these things just to reduce that. But if you have a little think about it, what often makes people really think about what they're doing is when other people can see what they're doing. So if you took away this bin and said you've got a clear bin, so it's little and everybody can see what you throw out, it could be really surprising to see how that affects people's behaviour. So if we've covered the why for our planet and for our pocket, okay, we've covered the how, avoid, reduce, reuse, recycle. What? Avoid, reduce, reuse, recycle. What? And if you think I'm following a theme of P's here, pocket, planet, what's something we go through in the office a lot that starts with P?
Paper.
Paper, plastic, one more.
Pens.
Yeah, I was going to say that because it pens, post-its, all those sorts of things. But if we use, we've got air conditioning going, we've got computers, power, beautiful. So we have paper, power, and plastic is our what. Okay, so if we can apply avoid, reduce, reuse, recycle to paper, power, plastic, pens, post-its, pencils, there is so much difference that we could make. Now, I said at the start, the other one we have just added in is e-waste. And if you think about what is e-waste, here is a graphic that gives you a fair idea what e-waste is and what we are most familiar with. Okay, these things like that, things like the mouse, the USB, the keyboard, the printer, the cables, they all add into our environment, not only in themselves as landfill, but cadmium, mercury, lead, which are all very harmful chemicals if we are not looking after our e-waste. But just think of the number of cables in this room. There's cables that do that. There's cables that do that. There's mass cables on the back of everything. But what about in your personal life? I mean, don't we all have one of these? And we have the cables and we have the headphones. Don't forget about smartwatches. Don't forget about your TV and your remote control. All these things contribute to e-waste in the environment. So when it comes down to it, the answer to e-waste, what is it? It's everyone's responsibility. Everybody has to take responsibility for how they are impacting our environment. Now, at the beginning, I sort of talked about the fact that, I'll come back to this one. How many Australians think they are doing enough? At the beginning, we said 50% thought they were doing enough. Australia discards almost 20 kilograms per person per year of e-waste, and we only recycle 5%. How can that be enough when Europe discards 14 kilograms a year and recycles 80%? How can we be thinking we are doing enough under those circumstances? So if it's everyone's responsibility, take your e-waste to a better place. In the beginning, I asked you what was the biggest impact, and you said the environment. Why should we do this for the environment? And I said, you know, we all know about that, so let's all just move on because we know. And I think that's a very blasé approach to take. I think that's what happens all the time. We all know it, so we all just move on and don't really think about it. But you think about where everything you use goes in the environment. So we said paper, and it is cluttering up the environment. We said power. How do we get our power? From the mining, an awful lot. Plastic, where does our plastic end up? On our beaches. And this is the one that really you need to really think about. It just doesn't occupy space. It creates all these pollutants that are going into our environment. So it's a huge amount of landfill, but the chemical implications are also very high. And you know what? It's everyone's responsibility. And dude, it's not that hard. We just have to be looking at the ways that we can do this. Knowing why and getting that in your head, getting those pictures in your head, that really helps. So we've looked at the why, we've looked at the how, avoid, reduce, reuse, recycle, because it just makes sense. We've looked at the what, the paper, the power, the plastic. What we need to look at is the who. So who?
Everyone.
Everyone.
All of us.
All of us, because it is our responsibility. So here in our workplace, we can look at what we can do to impact on that. And we talked at the beginning about the purpose today is to combine and compile our knowledge of sustainable work practices. This is not the first time I've run this workshop. So what we have done in our previous workshop is we ran some brainstorming, and we were going to run a brainstorming session that used these post-its. Start with P. They're wrapped in something that starts with P. So what I decided to do is to avoid using these all together. Let's avoid them. I'm going to run our post-it session. Sorry, the slide's not moving on well. There was the post-it session we ran. So we ran sticky notes instead of running the post-its, and we generated all these ideas in our office that we could be doing to avoid, reduce and reuse paper, flour, plastic, to recycle it when we're done, and we have generated a heap of ideas, and we did it using the sticky notes instead of using the stuff that arrived, that was produced in a factory, that was transported in trucks, all of which produces pollution, and we use this method instead. And this could then be sent out by email, so we can email as much as we can instead of printing it out. We can put it on the notice board in the staff morning tea room instead of giving everybody a piece of paper it goes on the wall. We've come up with all sorts of ideas on signage that we could put up, arrangements of the rooms that we could use, all ideas generated in a workshop here by our staff. So what we're going to do is leave this available that everybody can add to it. Everybody can come up with their ideas of how we can use sustainable work practices in our workplace, because it just makes sense. Environmentally, economically, and for your own self-esteem and how much you feel that you are doing, we can do this here together. Okay? Thank you. That's it.
What does it mean by put eyes up above the printer?
I'll tell you.